I lived in Brazil for 6 weeks in 1993. I took a Portuguese language course, an advanced class, because I'd already taken a beginner's course the year before. And I lived in Rio, and I was the girl from Ipanema. So I had an apartment that was about a block and a half from the beach of Ipanema. I was on Rua Gomes Carneiro com esquina de Visconde de Pirajá. And my Portuguese class was in Copacabana. I came back to the United States in the fall of 1993, took my general exams, and then I went back to Brazil on a fellowship. And I lived in Brazil all of 1994 and a little bit of 1994, 1995. I lived in Rio. I lived in São Paulo, which is the industrial capital and financial capital of the country. I lived in Goiás, which is the cattle basket of the country. I spent time in Bahia, which is where many of the African slaves were initially sent. I spent time in the far south, which is sort of like Argentina in terms of the Pampas, Gaúcho culture. And I spent time in the far south with communities that were displaced by dams. I spent time in a rural area. I mentioned earlier that I got on a horse and rode 8 or 9 hours into this very, very isolated maroon community, descendants of escaped slaves, and they'd been living in that community for a few hundred years, and they were threatened with eviction by a dam that was going to flood out their land. So Brazil was one of the most amazing experiences of my life. It's many countries. It's many cultures. I met people in the far south, in Erechim, Rio Grande do Sul, for example, who learned Portuguese when they went to the big city. The language at home was German. I fell in love with the culture. I fell in love with the food. I fell in love with the music. I fell in love with the people. I did a lot of academic research there. I spent time with various social movements, some women's movements, some Black movements, environmental movements. I spent a lot of time doing research with different government agencies in the power sector. Brazil was very, very special to me, and I try to go back every few years. It's an amazing country.